I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, we look at the looming deadlines for mandatory electric car sales in both our province and the country as a whole. One headline read, "Feds on track to eliminate gas cars by 2035. But are they? That's only 10 years from now. No gas cars being sold? Besides which, the first deadline is in 2026, only 3 months from now. The federal government says by that time, 20% of car sales must be EVs, while our province is more ambitious, saying it must be 26%. That's in 3 months. So how are these mandates possible? Or is this another of those ambitious promises like the Paris Accords on climate that get signed but never done? Like most people, I applaud aspirational goals, but I'm against writing laws and regulations that are nearly impossible to meet. Up front, I have to say I've driven an electric car for 10 years, but I don't feel biased either for or against EVs. But when it comes to forced mandates on how many electric or plug-in hybrids dealerships must sell, I've got some questions. First of all, 56% of British Columbians oppose forced EV mandates. So how are you going to make it happen? Then, as Barry Penner, chair of the Energy Futures Institute, says, it's like putting the cart before the horse, requiring people to buy electric cars before the infrastructure is in place. We don't have enough charging stations in the right places to make it work. Another major consideration is cost. So why would government stop the rebates when you're wanting more people to buy these cars? Barry Penner joins us to discuss these complications. Back in a moment. Barry Penner is currently the chair of Energy Futures Institute. But Barry, I can't think of you without thinking you're Minister Penner, because you and I were in government at the same time, in cabinet at the same time. So I'll just call you Minister. How about that?
I've been called worse.
Nice to see you again.
Great to see you, Carole.
I think on this important issue of mandates for electric car sales, people may not really realize what's going on because numbers fly by in the news and they've got other things on their mind. So let's start out by laying out what the mandates are.
Okay, at the federal level, and that's recently been in the news because of the Prime Minister making an announcement to temporarily suspend them. But the federal mandate was 20% electric vehicle sales by the 2026 model year, ramping up to 100% by 2035. Now, this was a commitment made while Justin Trudeau was still the Prime Minister and Stephen Guilbeault from Quebec was the Environment Minister federally. So this was announced about 2 years ago that they made these commitments. And at the time, I think most people kind of shrugged and thought it's far away, don't need to worry about it. But believe it or not, the 2026 model year is here now, right? It's still 2025 on the calendar, but for most auto manufacturers, they're now turning out what they call the 26 models. And so that 20% sales requirement was starting to bite across Canada at the federal level. And so Prime Minister Carney, a couple of weeks ago, announced a series of packages to help Canadian businesses, but the thing that really caught the news was putting a 60-day pause on mandates entirely. And also, it's a bit confusing, but if we read the fine print, basically saying the 26 model year requirement, it's just gone. At first, people thought it was suspended for 60 days, but it appears it's eliminated. And the rest of the mandate, well, that's under review. And we'll hear back in about, I guess now just over a month from now, supposedly, what the federal government's planning to do once the review is over.
And the provincial mandates?
Stays in place. So far, the BC's electric vehicle mandate remains. So we have these pancaking regulations. We have the federal requirement, but some provinces wanted to get in the act too and show to their voters that they were greener than the federal government, so they wanted to exceed the federal level to say, look what we're doing. And in Quebec, they introduced their own provincial policy, which was very aggressive, and then BC wanted to outdo Quebec as well as the federal government. So we have the most aggressive, and some would say unrealistic, electric vehicle mandates in all of Canada. And now with the US backing off under the Trump administration, looks like California will have to change their mandate. So this leaves British Columbia as having the most aggressive mandates for electric vehicle sales in North America.
So it's 26% in 3 months.
Well, no, right now, because the 26 models are appearing on dealers' lots. They have been since July.
But the way it's written is, okay, by 26, it's
26%.
it's going to be 26.
Sales.
But it jumps to 90%.
By 2030.
That's 5 years. And then 100% by 35.
That's correct.
So what's wrong with that, Barry? Isn't that a noble thing?
It's certainly signaling a certain amount of virtue, and it's aspirational, and it may well be, might be well-intentioned, but it doesn't look feasible. So market reality is such that consumer interest is dropping. The percentage of electric vehicle sales across Canada has plummeted this past year compared to the year before, and in British Columbia, the percentage of electric vehicle sales has dropped significantly as well.
To what number about?
So the latest stats, I was just looking at this on the weekend, from an organization known as S&P Global. They do deep dives into various technologies, but specifically autos. They're a world leader, recognized as an authority on electric vehicle markets. And they did a dive into the status of Canadian electric vehicle sales. And it looks like we're down, if I remember correctly, around 10% for fully electric. And then if you want to count plug-in hybrids, those are where you plug in and you can go a certain distance, and then your gasoline engine kicks in once you deplete your battery. Those amount to about another 5%. So if you wanted to put those two categories together, you could say that our total sales are maybe around 15%. But a year ago, they were up around 24% of all new vehicle sales.
So what's happening?
So we're seeing the biggest drop-off in the full electric vehicles. Hybrid electric vehicles that you plug in, those are staying about the same, maybe increasing slightly. But the biggest increase has been in just regular hybrids, the traditional hybrids like the Prius. Remember the original Prius that took over the taxi industry here and elsewhere, where you don't plug it in at all. It's not capable of being plugged in, but it's got a small battery, helps you get off the line. You can go a short distance in electric mode. And those improve fuel economy about 30 to 40% compared to a non-hybrid vehicle. Well, those sales are going up dramatically. So in BC now, they represent about 20% of all new vehicle sales are just regular hybrids, whereas the full electric are dropping significantly.
So tell me why you think.
But I should add, those regular hybrids, the ones that the public is voting with their wallets and buying, don't count. They are not given any credit under BC's electric vehicle mandates, and they potentially face a fine of up to $20,000 per vehicle. So the current Prius model, I don't know if you've seen it, they've completely redesigned it, and now it looks like a pretty sporty car. People are saying, that's a Prius? Well, yes, it is. And last year, it set a Guinness World Record of 93 miles to the gallon, on average, from a person who drove from Los Angeles City Hall to New York City Hall. So it's across the continent, they averaged 93 miles to the gallon.
So that's good, right?
That's good, but it's not perfect. And therefore, it could attract a penalty of $20,000 per car.
For the dealership that sells it.
It goes against the manufacturer, but the manufacturer is saying they're not wanting to eat it. So presumably that either gets passed along to the consumer, to the dealer, or maybe everyone takes a bit of a hit, or maybe they just don't sell the vehicle at all. And it appears now what's happening is there's rationing going on. The manufacturers are turning off the tap of non-electric vehicles into our market here in BC, so that really we're going to see a decrease in the supply of non-electric vehicles so that they can hit that ratio of 26%, what they call zero-emission vehicles. Those are the fully electric plus the plug-in hybrids right now count for now, but they're supposed to phase that out in a couple of years that they won't count. Anyway, to maintain that 26% balance, they'll hold back on the non-zero-emission vehicles.
So let's back up to the full electric and the drop-off
Yes.
in sales. What's behind that?
I think it's a price point in particular. So until January of this year, the federal government offered up to $5,000 as a consumer rebate. It came off right at the point of sale. So it was quite easy for the consumer. You'd see it as a line item on your bill of sale, and it would be taken off. The dealers had to go through the hoops and the paperwork to claim it from the federal government, but for the consumer it was easy. The province had a similar program. It was up to $4,000 per vehicle, but starting in the summer of 2024, the provincial government started changing the eligibility requirements, making it harder to qualify for. I won't get into the details, but it was income tested and vehicle tested, and the value, like, it got very complicated. Net result was about 70% of vehicles no longer qualified under the provincial program starting last summer. And that's when we started to see the percentage of new vehicles as electric vehicles start sliding. And that slide got accelerated when the federal rebate ran out of money in January. And then the province killed their program completely in May. So with all those incentives coming off the table, consumers are faced, that translates into higher costs at the end of the day for the consumers. So surprise, price goes up, demand drops. That's basic economics. So that's what we've seen.
And so you and I have been around the cabinet table. I'm trying to imagine, you're saying, government saying, we want more people buying electric cars, and we're going to try to force this with mandates. And, price is a bit of an issue. So let's raise the cost of price for the cost of the car for all these people who are trying to figure out whether they're going to jump into that market. Barry, more to talk about in terms of where we go with this, but we're going to take a short break right now, and then we'll be right back. So governments want us to buy more EVs, and they're making the price a little bit higher, which doesn't make sense. But the other side of it is that we don't really have the infrastructure in place. I've heard you say they're putting the cart before the horse because it's not enough infrastructure and it's not the places that we need.
Yeah, it's really, here's something I've been thinking about a lot, as it's creating a social division, potentially, between the haves and have-nots. The haves being people that have single detached homes with their own secure garage, where they can upgrade the electrical service to put in a level 2 charger. You have to pay extra for that, but you can do it if you have your own garage. And it's typically single-family homes that have that. And then there's everybody else. And depending on whose numbers you look at, about 40% of British Columbians live in multifamily homes, condos, apartment buildings, townhouses. And there, it's a very different story to have your own dedicated charger that's available for you to use when you want it. For people with single-family homes, it's waiting for them if they pay for the money to upgrade. But if you're in a condo, you may be in line waiting for everybody else, or you might not have it at all. And the cost to upgrade existing apartment buildings that might be 40 or 50 years old to put in the service is prohibitive. So it's really creating kind of the haves and the have-nots in terms of access to affordable charging. Because if you rely on public infrastructure for charging, public chargers, the price you pay for the electricity is much higher. It's marked up. It's not your residential rate that you're paying, your typical 11 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Depending on the provider, you can be paying up to 45 or 50 cents a kilowatt. And what does that do? Well, that changes the price equation in terms of whether you'll be saving money buying an EV on your fuel or not. If you're paying 4 times the residential rate for electricity, it pretty well negates the fuel savings. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done here. And like you said, yes, the cart before the horse, we've created these mandates before we had the infrastructure in place to support the level of penetration that we're looking for.
So is there any chance in this world that these mandates are going to come into effect and work?
Well, they're in effect now, and we're going to see what the consequences and the work part. Well, I think you'll see manufacturers withhold non-electric vehicles from the BC market in sufficient quantities to try and hit that sales target to get the ratio correct. But what does that mean? That means that people will have a harder time buying the vehicles they want to get. You remember what happened during COVID? We had supply shortages due to supply chain and manufacturing shutting down. And what that did was not just drive up the cost of new vehicles, but it flowed through the used car market, and we saw a big increase in the price of used vehicles.
Yeah, I remember that.
And who does that hurt the most? Lower income. Lower income people aren't going to the new car showrooms to get their next vehicle. They typically rely on the used car market. And so one of the unintended consequences, and there are several with this policy, one of the unintended consequences could be hurting lower income people. We did a report on that at Energy Futures. Professor Carole from BCIT School of Business looked at this specific issue for us and worked out the numbers about how disproportionately it will tend to impact lower income people more.
So we've got the mandate that says we're going to force British Columbians especially into buying more electric cars. But the problems are too costly for very many people. The whole notion that somehow we've got the infrastructure to support it. But let me ask you something else. Where's all the electricity going to come from?
You're not supposed to ask about that. We're supposed to assume that it's just there. And that's certainly what many British Columbians do think, that we have an abundance, and that's propagated by the government. In their Clean BC policy, they state right at the outset that we have an abundance of clean electricity. If you look in the Oxford Dictionary, abundance means more than you need. But we've been a net importer of electricity for the last 3 years in a row, spending about $2.3 billion on imports in the last 2 years. So we're spending money to buy electricity mostly from the United States, where a lot of it's still generated from natural gas and coal, in order to support our infrastructure and keep these lights on. And it's not optional. In the BC Hydro's latest annual report, I give them credit for transparency. They say that they're importing electricity to meet domestic load requirements. Again, dictionary definition of requirements, not optional, it's required.
And so how much electricity? Have you done any numbers? What would it take to meet these mandates?
Again, Professor Carole from BCIT crunched the numbers, and it came out to approximately 2 more Site C dams worth of electricity would be required if all of our existing passenger fleet in British Columbia converted to electric. And that was done based on Natural Resource Canada calculations of the amount of electric energy required per kilometer, and then getting data from ICBC about the average amount that people in British Columbia drive per year. They track all of this. So you put those two numbers together, and you come up with about 2 Site C dams worth of additional electricity.
So no possibility in the world we're going to get 2 more Site Cs.
Site C number 1 has just been built. It's finally online after 15 years after it was announced by then Premier Campbell. It's now operating, but it's not producing as much as it could because we've been in a drought. So keep that in mind. It's subject to weather conditions.
So it looks to me like these mandates are not possible. So how does the government get out of it, really? The Fed's saying it was fuzzy at first, like a 6-month delay and a review, but that doesn't help anybody. What are the dealerships supposed to do? What am I as a purchaser?
It's created confusion. And I'll tell you what, more confusion, when they also said this summer, some ministers said, we'll bring back some kind of rebate, but we don't know when or how much. So I've heard from dealers that say that's the worst possible message, because a potential buyer is saying, well, I'll just wait then, because I might get a $5,000 rebate check or I might not. But if you're a consumer, you might just wait to see if that $5,000 check materializes.
So we've got confusion going on at the federal level. BC, we've got our mandates. As a government, how do they get out of it? Because they're not going to be able to meet that.
So they're in the middle of what's called the review of the Clean BC policy, which is where this EV mandate kind of flowed out of that. It's one of the policies to try and reduce our emissions. So the outcome of that review is supposed to be out sometime later this fall. The preliminary report's already in the hands of Minister Dix, the Energy Minister, and then it's got to go to Cabinet, and the government will decide what they're going to do. Some of the environmental groups that advocated for Clean BC in the first place, they've now telegraphed and said publicly they would support watering down slightly the 2035 target of 100%. Maybe 90% would be okay. And just in the last few days, I've learned that in Quebec, they've now moved their 2035 target from 100% to 90%. And 2 months ago, they said that they would also start giving partial credit for regular hybrids. BC's not doing that. It wasn't recognized in the federal mandate. So Quebec has already made some moves to get more realistic.
So,
And I want to just make one more point on this unintended consequence. And that didn't dawn on me till this summer. Those hybrid vehicles that have become very popular, the most popular ones are built in Canada. The Toyota RAV4 hybrid, the Honda Civic hybrid, and the Honda CR-V hybrid. It's a small SUV that's very popular with families. They're actually made in Canada, but under our mandates, they're not good enough. And they could be hit with a $20,000 penalty per car. So our public policy is discouraging Canadians from buying made in Canada vehicles. We don't currently make any passenger all-electric vehicles in Canada. So this is a policy that's actually going to force us to buy cars not made in Canada. At the time, some premiers and the Prime Minister were talking about elbows up, support Canadian industry, but this policy, one of the unintended consequences, is to do just the opposite. And I just find that extremely frustrating.
I think the elbows up are gone.
I think they've gone down substantially, but this is one example of it. Like,
Well,
it's just not thought through.
Thank you, Barry, for trying to piece all of this together for us. I think there are a whole lot of challenges out there, and maybe people will be raising voices about it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Back in a moment. Why do governments of all stripes overpromise and underdeliver? Provincial trade barriers will be gone by July 1st. No gas cars will be sold in Canada in 10 years. I'll end the war in Ukraine on day one. Or the most precious of all, my government will be fiscally responsible. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.